All right, so my name's Ian MacRae, and I am with EN Computers. And EN Computers is a managed services company, and we work with folks who have a small IT team or maybe no IT team to supplement the IT services that they have for their users, or provide all of those services to their users if they don't have any IT team, so that they can have the experience of having a fully staffed IT department for their users. And in that capacity, we take on security and compliance work, which has been growing for a number of our users who are in the defense and manufacturing space, that being one of the more impactful industries for the state of Virginia, DC, and Maryland, the regions that we service. So coming up in 2020, there are more demands coming in on defense contractors and manufacturers to achieve compliance. So we wanted to learn about some of those demands that are coming up, and also there are substantial costs associated with achieving compliance, and we wanted to see if there's any ways that we can take advantage of Department of Defense funding to achieve security and compliance better for the clients that we serve. So in trying to solve this puzzle, we've learned about Genedge, and they're on the webinar with us today. And Genedge is an agency of the state of Virginia that is empowered to help manufacturers and defense contractors achieve compliance. And we've got David and Roy on the webinar today to learn more about how they can help manufacturers and defense contractors. So with that introduction, can we let's learn more about Genedge.
Thanks, Ian. This is Roy Lubke with Genedge, and I'm assisted this morning by David Bartlow, who is also with Genedge. And so what we're going to do today is talk to you a little bit about the DFARS 7012 regulation and how that impacts Virginia Department of Defense suppliers. And we're also going to talk a little bit about what we know about the upcoming CMMC certification, which is the Cybersecurity Maturity Model certification that is coming out in 2020 from the Department of Defense. And so we'll get into both of those things. So Dave, if you could go to the next slide. Okay, so what we're going to talk about this morning here is what the DFARS 252.204-7012 regulation is, if you're not familiar with it. We'll talk about how that involves a set of specifications called the NIST Special Publication 800-171. And through those two items, we will talk to you about how to create a plan of action to control what's called controlled unclassified information. And then we'll finish up by talking about the upcoming CMMC certification that DoD is requiring going forward for all suppliers to DoD contracts, not just if it relates to controlled unclassified information. And I'll get into that into a little detail, but it involves every single company. So just real briefly, who we are. So Genedge is a unique organization. We are actually part of the state of Virginia government. We are partially funded by the U.S. Department of Commerce NIST organization under their Manufacturing Extension Partnership Program, which has been in place around the United States for about 25 years. And what we do is a number of different things, from helping smaller businesses generate a business strategy all the way through commercializing new concepts and new products and services to improving operations performance, either on the shop floor or through customer service and those kinds of things. Next, please. So there's 51 of us around the United States. We're one of 51. Every state has one in the in operations. And basically what our focus is to help smaller businesses to get higher level consulting services support at an affordable price. So we're through all the different government associations, we're able to offer services at a more affordable price for smaller businesses. And then we're also involved in a number of different grant programs, one of which we'll talk about today. Next, please. So what is our program? So the DFARS 7012 regulation went into effect in 2017. It went into all DoD contracts starting in October of 2017, actually. And in that contract, in that statement, what it says is prime and subcontractors on a DoD contract must meet the 7012 regulation. And that 7012 regulation, we'll talk about what exactly that is, but it's requiring businesses to protect what's referred to as controlled unclassified information. And I'll give you the link in here later where you can find what controlled unclassified information may consist of. And right now, that list is being held at the U.S. Archives website. You go to the archives.org, .gov, and you look up CUI, and it'll take you right to that page. And there's a huge list of things that could potentially be CUI. CUI is supposed to be marked by the DoD. And that gets a little confusing because sometimes it's not. Also, if you create CUI, you don't even know about it, and it subsequently becomes marked as CUI by DoD, you are still responsible for ensuring the safety of that data. So what we're looking at is working with smaller companies to help them understand what this regulation is, what the requirements are of your company, and to help you become compliant with the 7012 regulation. So we do a number of things from help assess your current situation, find out what your gaps are, and then help you get the right level of support from companies like Ian's group that can help you improve the security posture of your business, both technically and through a series of policy and procedure documents that you are required to have in your business. So if you go to the next slide, please. So we're looking to help those companies most at risk. So DoD estimates there's about 5,000 companies in the state of Virginia that are doing business with DoD. So there's a lot of companies, and as we've been dealing with this for the last couple of years, we are finding that many of them either don't even know what we're talking about, are starting to hear what we're talking about, and are kind of confused as to what they are supposed to be doing. So we obtained a grant from the Department of Defense that we're applying. This is our second year of the grant, and we are applying it to 75 companies in this fiscal year, where the grant pays for 80% of services related to helping you become compliant with the DFARS 7012, and as it starts to evolve, we're starting to get people clued in as to what the CMMC is going to do to their business and how these two DoD activities blend together. And the services range from doing system scans to assessing the IT infrastructure of the business that you have, and helping you to create the key documents that are in the 7012 reg, as well as helping you to mitigate the gaps and close those gaps by increasing the security posture of your business. Next. So, who's eligible? Anybody in the state of Virginia that is a DoD supplier who is dealing with them through a contract is eligible for this grant. Either prime or subcontractors, where you have the DFAR 7012 clause in your contract, or you anticipate getting a contract with DoD. And again, the CMMC is going to add another twist to this thing. Because when we first started it, it was just about controlled on class, and now it's expanded to everybody. So anyone who is going to be doing business with the Department of Defense in the state of Virginia is eligible. And it's a statewide program, and we'll get into the specifics of how you can apply and become part of this thing. Next, please. So we group this the activities into two phases, if you will, and they don't have to necessarily be in this phase one first, then phase two, and I'll tell you why in a second. So what the phase one is all about is understanding what you currently have and see what part of the DFARS and 800-171 specification you are meeting, help you write up a plan of action and milestones, help you create an incident response plan, help you define what you need to have a cybersecurity plan, and conduct an initial vulnerability scan on your system. These are the elements that the DFAR 7012 regulation requires you to have. You must have a security plan, an incident response plan, a gap analysis, and a POAM. So it's not, they're not, at this point in time, they have not been saying you must have everything completely 100% squared away, but with the CMMC coming, they are saying that. So it's been an evolution on this process. So what you really have to do is understand where you are relative to the NIST 800-171 spec and what your gaps are and what it's going to take to fill those gaps. Next. The second phase, this bucket, is remediation. So it's related to remediation. So let's say you know that you have some gaps and you say, well, all right, we've got to fix these things right out of the chute. We may recommend to you that you do a phase two activity first if you've got some really glaring holes before you try to write up your security plan. Or it may be that we go through the phase one, we do the analysis, we find the gaps, and we go, oh, okay, here's all this list of things that you're going to have to do, and the grant program can help you in paying for that remediation and getting you linked up with those experts that can help you with a number of different pieces of this pie. Also, you will have to do ongoing vulnerability scanning per the 7012 and the 800-171. We can help do some penetration testing. We can help you re-architect your system if that comes to that. We can work with you to identify what kind of staff training you might need relative to cybersecurity. and help you identify what the pieces of the puzzle are to complete a security plan for the business. And a lot of that is policy and governance statements, and you'll see what that means here in a little bit. Next, please. So this is an eye chart on the program. Basically, we've identified companies in Virginia. We've been doing outreach programs, either both online and in person. And what we do is we ask you to apply online for the service. The application doesn't commit you to anything. It just basically gets you on the list. We then talk to you in detail to find out what your situation is and then figure out what the best course of action is. So we may do a phase 1 right off the bat, or we may do a phase 2 effort first to close some big things that you have, and then go back and do the phase 1 work and then finalize it. A lot of this work involves several different third parties. So Genedge is not a technical IT company. We are not a policy and procedure documentation company. But what we do is we partner with those folks here in Virginia that are specialists in those areas. We get you to the right company, and I've done a lot of vetting and positioning with these companies to be able to put these services together at an affordable level, and then the grant program takes that down even lower to help get this going. And really, the reason, no good deed goes unpunished. The DoD for the last couple of years really have just said every man for himself. You all figure this out, and then a lot of nothing happened. And so now DoD said, look, we really got to get this thing going, and so they've decided to start putting together some grants around the country to be able to encourage people to start moving forward on this. So that's really the reason why they're behind this effort. Next, please. So here's the tricky part. What is compliant mean, right? Everybody goes, well, all right, so I got 7012, and within 7012, it tells me I should follow the guidelines in the NIST Special Publication 800-171. Well, what does that mean? DoD has no definition for what compliant is. They're really not providing any guidance on what compliance is. And right at this moment, there is no certification. So you can't go somewhere and ask somebody to give you a certificate that says, yep, you're compliant with NIST, with the DFAR 7012. What the 7012 says is you must have those 4 documents, and you must do what you need to do to protect controlled unclassified information. Now, what's happened is the gap there became readily apparent to DoD, and they went ahead and they announced this CMMC audit or certification. So that is going to go into effect in 2020, and I'm going to talk into a little bit of detail about that. What I want you to know right now as you're looking through this is there's going to be 5 levels of certification within CMMC, level 1 through level 5. Level 1 and 2 is going to be low level of compliance with the FARS 52 and some compliance with the NIST Special Publication 800-171. Level 3 is going to mean that you are fully compliant with the 800-171 specs. So they're all integrated together. There's not going to be some new to be defined specification. It's all based on 800-171. And all of the new contracts coming out of DoD starting in the fall are going to require a CMMC level 1 through 5. everybody is going to have this level. And I'll talk about where you get that level kind of at the end of this thing. So it's up to you to provide reasonable assurance that CUI is protected for the special publication, for the DFAR 7012. Next, please. So what is DFAR 7012? So there's the link to the actual verbiage of the document. So in your contract, there will probably be a clause in there. There'll be a link that says you are submitting that you are or will be compliant with this regulation. They don't usually embed the regulation terms in the contract. They just say DFARS 252, 204, 7012. It's up to you to figure out what that means. So here's what it means, all right? The statement says you must do these elements to be compliant with the 7012, all right? So there's a technical component to this thing, which is about 1/3 of the effort, and then there is a policy and procedure documentation component that is about 2/3 of the regulation. And again, what this is all about is saying, how are you protecting CUI? Next, please. Oh, and by the way, if you have questions, anybody that's watching, if you go into the chat space and type in a question, Ian is watching it, and we'll answer those questions for us in line here if anybody has any questions. If not, if you're not comfortable with that, we'll give you some other ways to answer some questions as well. So this verbiage is right out of the 7012 specification. It gets a little confusing because they refer to both something called covered defense information and unclassified controlled technical information. So what you need to understand is that as far as DoD is concerned, they're both the same thing. It's one and the same thing. Controlled, unclassified information, and those items are listed there at the archives link that I've embedded here, where you can go see what might be potentially CUI. CUI is supposed to be marked. So if it's on a piece of paper, it's supposed to have CUI markings on it. If it is a digital file, that's still supposed to be marked in some way or form. Next, please. So, NIST Special Publication 800-171. What this is it's an outline of 110 controls that you need to be answering the questions about how you are choosing to support best practices or security of CUI following this outline. So the DFAR 7012 specifically refers to this publication. It says that they recommend, they don't demand, because you could use, for example, you could theoretically use ISO 20001, but they don't do that. They recommend, and the CMMC is being built on the 800-171 spec. There's a couple of them that you'll find. You want to find the 800-171 Rev 1. That's important to know because there's a second version that is in review right now called Rev B as Bravo. Rev B Bravo is it has a few more controls on it, and that level of security is what is going to get companies up into the CMMC level 4 and 5. But Rev B has not been published yet as a standard. It is in review right now and open for public comments and things like that. So the one that you want is the Rev number 1. And there's 4 sections, 4 basic areas to the Rev 1. Governance and policy, those are the way that you're going to manage access to things. So you have to have statements about how people are allowed to use smartphones to access your email. You have to have comments about or documentation about how you are going to allow people to work from home and access company data. You have to have policy statements on where CUI is going to be stored, and there's a number of things that you have to document. That is what takes up the majority of your time right there, is number 1 and number 2. Number 3, the user behavior is related to training of your staff on how to protect CUI. So they need to know how to use encrypted email if they're sending CUI. You have to train them on, you have to demonstrate training on identifying potential attacks against the business, attacks against their emails. If somebody's trying to get in and steal data and those kinds of things. And then the 4th area is the technical area. And that's, like I say, about 1/3 of the work is related to technical infrastructure in terms of hardware, software, you know, how you're setting up passwords and those kinds of things. Next, please. So I'm not going to go into excruciating detail here at this time on what these different controls are. We've got some information embedded in here. We'll talk a little bit about it at a very high level. I want you to see this, if you haven't seen this before for the first time, this is what you have to be aware of. The 800-171 has 14 families of controls, meaning there's 110 different, for lack of a better term, questions that you have to answer and have documented as to what your policies and procedures are to protect the CUI information. I'm not going to read all this to you, but what you're going to see here is that a lot of it has to do with how you're managing the business and not so much, you know, just the technical components. So go to number 1, next page.
Roy, one of the
yes, sir.
questions I just wanted to point out here is if you go back to that last slide,
Back up. Yeah.
We have implementing the controls, and then there's actually operating those controls with the policies and procedures. And I think when we talk about the 80% offset of cost that we can achieve through your program, that's really going to be going through the implementation of those controls. In other words, what is the policy procedure, having that documented, getting some of the technology set up, but actually operating those controls from a day-to-day standpoint, that's really not being covered under that 80% offset. And I think that that's an important thing to point out, because you really need a team of professionals to operate these controls. You need to have people that are able to train users. You need to have system administrators that are you know, able to unlock an account if somebody you know, exceeds the number of you know, password tries and therefore gets their account locked out, who's a legitimate user. You need to have security professionals that are looking at logs and reviewing those logs and chasing down risks that may be occurring actively on the network. So I think if we look at it like airport security, you know, we're all familiar with the metal detectors and the X-ray machines. You know, I often see that cost being the only cost associated to these initiatives. You also need to have those people there sitting in chairs operating that equipment, which is really a whole different level of cost. that a lot of small IT departments really don't have those people, the staff available to operate.
Yeah, that's an excellent point, and I would add on to that, Ian, that in the past, up to now, you could be a small business. You could be a one-person business, or you could be 20 employees, and you could get by kind of managing your own IT, right? And what we see in a lot of cases is very little security. Everything is kind of wide open because no one really truly understands all of the intricacies of setting this stuff up. So they go, well, just open it up to everybody and we'll just kind of muddle through. Well, in dealing with the Department of Defense going forward, those days are over. These requirements that DoD is doing, and what they're trying to do, what you need to understand is that the many of the attacks that are being made on DoD sites are actually coming through small businesses. Mm-hmm. The small business, because it's is the weakest link, the bad guys can get access to a DoD facility through your business. They can embed things on your products or your services, if they're technical or what have you, in there and deliver that stuff to the DoD, and nobody knows about it. And so DoD is aggressively, very aggressively, trying to get control of this cybersecurity attack situation. I would tell you that the most aggressive right now seems to be the U.S. Navy. They've had a huge number of really significant attacks on them. It's a very complex environment. The Air Force, again, is very serious about this as well because of all the different weapon systems and the technology that they're embedding. And the Army is waking up to this as well and becoming just as concerned as the other two entities. But I can tell you right now that the leading edge on this is the Navy. And if you look at it, the new CNO of the U.S. Navy used to run cybersecurity for the U.S. Navy. So that's going to become a very a high target focus for CNO and the Navy going forward. So in any case, without rambling, these 14 different families, as you could see, they are talking about how you are managing your business as well as how the system itself is set up and operating. Next, please. So there's a system security plan which says you're going to answer all those 110 questions. That, in effect, is a security plan. It's a diagram of your network. It's a list of all your assets, technical assets, physical assets, anything that's associated with your IT infrastructure. And it's the answer to those 110 questions. That, in effect, becomes the system security plan. Then, item number 2 you have to have is what's called an incident response plan, right? What is your plan if you are attacked? And so there's 5 different elements to an incident response plan, and we will help you. We have a template for this, and we work with you one-on-one to help you refine that template down to something more useful for your business. So what a response plan says is, how are you training your people to identify that they've been attacked? What are you going to do once you are attacked, and how do you handle that? What are you doing to monitor the incident through conclusion? What are you going to do, and who are you going to report to? And then how are you going to test this incident plan? So once you have the plan and you go, this is what we're going to do if we're attacked, you also have to You also have to display that you've done some level of testing. It might not be a full system test or what have you, but it might just be a table test where you're going, does everybody understand, who to call, where to call, why to call, and what you're going to have to do specifically with your machines and your network to make sure that information is captured and stored so that you can go back and have someone review after the fact why and how you got attacked and what possibly was stolen or violated in some way. Next, please. So what's the security plan? Well, as I just said, it describes your system boundary, which means what's your network look like, what are all your assets. And again, to get back to one of the points that Ian made, and I forgot to mention this. So our 80% is of the grant payment is for services. It's not for hardware or software. So we cannot buy any assets. So if you have to upgrade servers, software, PCs, or any of that kind of thing, we cannot purchase those things. What we can do is help pay for the implementation of those things. So we can help you with the operational environment. You have to answer all those 110 questions in the SP 800-171, and you have to understand and document what relationships you have both technically and operationally with other systems. So for example, if your staff is on some other system and that system has CUI and your staff has access to it, what are your policies and procedures about what can be accessed, who can access it, where they can access it? Those are the things that we're talking about in terms of relationships or connections to other systems. You may be using your network to connect to some other cloud application, to another cloud site, or some other system. And what you have to be aware of is that as the data goes up and down the wire, what are you doing to ensure protection of CUI as it goes up and down that wire while it gets connected to somebody else's system or operations? Next, please. The plan, you can write this yourself. It's not something that you cannot do. It is time consuming. And what you do is you go to this link here for 800-18, and that gives you an outline of a security plan. So it says here are the things that you might want to include in the security plan. We've taken that and embedded that into our approach and how we do the system scans, the vulnerability scan, and the system and the assessment and the production of the security plan with you. Next, please. So, what is a vulnerability scan? I'm talking about that a couple of times. Let me be clear on that. A vulnerability scan is different from a penetration test. A vulnerability scan is not changing your system in any way. It's not trying to break in. It's not trying to do anything. It's basically a series of software tools that get executed on your system to look for weaknesses and identify those weaknesses so that you can begin to close those gaps and understand where the holes are and what you need to do to close them down. So what we do through our work with us, when we do this phase one work, we will work with a third-party company. They will put a system scan on your network with your approval. They will scan it, they'll get the reports back, and we will help you produce a gap analysis and then turn that gap analysis into a plan of action. So all of those gaps equal money in order to execute them. It's money and time that you have to apply to fix those gaps. So we roll all the findings up from our collection of data from you and the vulnerability scan, and actually produce your first system security plan draft that you have, that you can use to be in compliance with the DFAR 7012. So we do the vol scan, we help you produce the system security plan, we help you produce the incident response plan, and we help you produce that POAM. Next, please. So how do you get involved in this? Very simple. You go to this link. The link is just an application that says who you are, and it gets you into the program. It doesn't commit you to anything. All it does is it starts the process. Once you send that application in, we will call you and have a conversation about your situation. We'll most likely go into a phase 1 where we will do those 5 elements that I just said with you. There will be a lot of gaps, most likely, and don't let that stop you from getting started. This is an evolution. DoD understands that it's an evolution, especially for smaller businesses. You are not, the IBM Corporation. They're not expecting that level of operational control, but what they are requiring is that you move forward toward becoming a strongly protected security environment for that data. Next, please. So the other thing I want to talk to you a little bit about is the CMMC. So in the spring this year, DoD announced that this thing is happening. What they're doing is they put out an RFI back in September for a company to become for a nonprofit company to become the source of where you get an audit. So it's going to be very similar to an ISO audit. So you will, and they have not selected this company yet. So all of the responses were due in on the 21st of October, and then DoD is going to select this company. And what DoD is doing is they are not contracting with this nonprofit company. They are going to do a memorandum of understanding so that DoD will not spend any money on this. DoD will say, these guys know how to conduct an audit that will determine how closely you are aligned with the NIST SP 800-171. And that company will provide you a score of 1 through 5. You will contact that company. You will pay for an audit. They will come out just like ISO. It is to be determined what this audit structure looks like. It is going to be to be determined what the pricing of this is. This is all going to roll out beginning in January, where they announce what these rules are for the auditing, for who the company is going to be, and all this stuff. And the target is that by the fall of 2020, all RFPs and RFIs coming out of defense will have a CMMC level requirement for everybody. It does not apply just solely to CUI anymore. Next, please. That means if you're making sandwiches on a DoD contract, you are going to have a CMMC level. Most likely, what they're stating out in public is that will be like a level 2. And a level 2, what DoD statements have come out and said is, a level 2 will equate to the FARS 52 document. That is a lighter level of security requirements. They're going to be targeting level 3 at being in full compliance with SP 800-171. That means not just having a gap analysis and a POAM, but that you are functioning as a business operating under the guidance or the definition of 800-171 and be following those definitions fully. Not just, oh, I got a POAM and I'm going to get to it in a couple of years. So, at the end, we don't know how this is all going to play out, but this is what's coming at you. And you can read all about it at this website that they have created for the CMMC. They've been updating this on a regular basis. There are briefings there for you to watch. There are a number of folks that are driving this. There's a name that you need to get familiar with. The person driving all of this is a lady named Katie Arrington. And her last name starts with an A alpha, double RINGTON. Katie Arrington runs this whole effort. And so she's put out a bunch of different electronic briefings that you can get access to and keep up to date with how this thing is progressing. Next, please. So this is our contacts. You can call us. You can go to the application and fill it in with your phone number, and we'll call you back. And we have some other information out there for you to read about the cybersecurity. Now, what we'll do is we'll make this presentation available. You can download it from Ian's website. And Dave, I think if you go to the next page, I think we've got the 800-171. Did you put it at the back there? All of the different, all those details. Yeah, so the details are in there. It explains a little bit more about what every control is. The best thing for you to do is download that 800-171 specification and start reading it. It is not fun to read, but you're going to have to become, that's going to have to become your next good friend going forward. And as you see, there's lots and lots of details in here about the questions that you have to answer. So feel free to download this, and feel free at any time to give us a call to help straighten this out. That's what we're here for. Genedge is basically a nonprofit organization, a state of Virginia entity, and we're here to help smaller businesses to deal with this and move forward. So with that concludes my presentation for this morning. I'm going to ask Ian to see if there's any other further questions and to close this out.
Roy, this has been great. I do have a couple of quick ones for you.
Sure.
So you mentioned how the CMMC levels are going to start kicking off in, it sounds like maybe fourth quarter 2020.
Yep.
Most of the folks that we work with have multiple contracts that they're operating under. So I would assume that that's going to happen per contract schedule. So they may have some contracts that are still under the old regime and the new contracts coming up. So effectively, whenever those contracts renew, after fourth quarter 2020, they're going to need to address this.
Yeah. And it's going forward. The DoD is not going to do it retrospectively. They're not going to go back in time. But what they're saying is, and the key thing is to realize, if the contract says DFAR 7012 in it, then that has nothing to do with the CMMC, right? They're two separate things. Mm-hmm. So you will still need to be compliant with 800-171 in order to be compliant with the DFAR 7012. Going forward, they're going to include, in addition to DFAR 7012, they're going to load CMMC into the contract as well.
And the CMMC is basically a front-loaded hurdle that you have to jump across.
Yep.
Which is tied to the 800-171.
Yep.
Those people
Absolutely.
that to want the level 3, which is, like you said, the revision 1 of 800-171. So
yeah.
If somebody's already gone down the path of 800-171 and they're actually making good faith effort to implement the controls, then they're not wasting their time. This isn't a whole initiative.
No, they're not wasting their time at all. Everything is being built on 800-171. Yeah. And remember that your contracts, your existing contracts that have DFAR 7012 in it, you're attesting that you are in compliance with that, and that includes 800-171. So if you sign that contract and you are not in compliance with 800-171, I'll lead you to your own conclusion as to what is going on. But that means that you better get your ducks in a row and get yourself lined up, both in documentation, procedures, and policies, as well as your IT infrastructure. It's both elements.
So I guess the other thing that sometimes comes up is like how when we're doing the policies and procedures, each contract has a different manager, and oftentimes we'll be working with somebody and they'll be a prime on one, and they'll be there'll be a sub on something else, and sometimes a sub of a sub.
Yeah.
So the reporting out can get a little crazy.
Yes.
Does it seem like that's going to change at all, where you're going to maybe go directly to a DoD website and file a report? Because that seems to be something where a lot of the folks that we're working with, they're wanting to make a good effort on this, but it seems like the folks that they're interfacing with, maybe that's a sub of a sub,
yes,
really don't know what's going on, or not making the same efforts.
Yes. The way this is specified in the DFAR 7012 reg is that within 72 hours of a breach, you must contact your contracting officer. So if you're the sub, your contracting officer is the prime. So there should be a security officer identified at the prime, and the prime should be communicating to you who that contact is. When you contact the prime, then the prime must contact their contracting officer at DoD, and the way they do that is either through both through a phone call to notify them, and there is a site on DibNet that we provide to everybody. We provide you the link to where this is. You can look it up. And it's a big long link. I can't remember it off the top of my head. But you go to DibNet and you log that you were breached, and then you will be contacted by DoD at their discretion. So the flow down is the prime is always responsible for notifying the DoD contracting officer. The sub is required to notify the prime.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense. And it seems like a lot of folks also fall under multiple regulations. So they might be, let's say they're manufacturing something for aerospace.
Mm-hmm.
They're going to fall under the aerospace regulations. They're going to fall under DFARS. They're going to fall under ITAR. More than likely the export controls. And this program is really focused at the DFARS regulation, not really addressing those other ones, although there is a lot of overlap goals.
Yes. Yeah, that's correct. And that's becoming a cost issue for a lot of smaller companies, is that, yes, now DoD has a requirement, and that's different from maybe some other thing. And yes, they have to keep up. It's their responsibility to keep up with these different regs based on their contracts that will state what they have to comply with And, you know, unfortunately, they're going to have to be looking at a number of different layers. But this one is the most important one related to doing work directly with DoD. Outside of DoD, I don't know what the other agencies are doing. And then certainly within an industry, like you say, some of the larger vendors that you're doing business with may have other requirements that you have to meet. But I will say that the 800-171 is really kind of a, it's an overarching outline, if you will. And if you're conducting and meeting the 110 controls, and you're actively managing the business under those 110, I'm going to tell you that's going to take you a long way dealing with anybody, because that's a very comprehensive definition of a security environment.
Yeah, what we're seeing is that the government is often mandating all three of the controls: the aerospace controls, the U.S. citizenship controls with ITAR, as well as the DFARS 171. So it you know, where there may be a general data retention requirement in the 800-171, you've got to retain your data even further if you're in aerospace. If you know, you're going to have to now staff your IT teams with all U.S.-based citizens if you're the ITAR. So it just you know, sort of further narrows things down and can increase the cost substantially. You know, to get somebody that's all U.S.-based.
And that's popped up with us at a couple of different client sites where they're looking to go to let's say to a cloud application. And that vendor for that cloud application has to have, if you're subject to the ITAR regs, then the site where the cloud is being hosted and the employees that are managing that site have to be U.S. citizens in order to be ITAR compliant. So you have to be really careful, because a lot of these cloud applications are offshore, and they cannot be offshore if you are under ITAR compliant. So you got to be really careful as you start looking at contracting with cloud apps and cloud vendors because of that, because of the ITAR stuff.
Well, this has been great. I really appreciate everyone's expertise and going into how you can help people and these regulations. And here at Eaton Computers, you know, we're all about solving problems, and that's why we have the tagline "Unexpected Solutions." So in many cases, it's about partnering, and it's about getting you know, the right team together. So we really appreciate the Genedge team helping our clients and helping the state of Virginia step up, because ultimately, if we aren't doing it here, then other organizations are going to win elsewhere, because you know, we aren't getting people CMMC compliant here. They're going to lose their contracts. So it's really, I think, a critical time for us.
Yep, absolutely. Well, appreciate the opportunity. Feel free to reach out to us anytime.
All right. Thanks a lot.
All right. Goodbye.
Bye.